They thought they were picking on an easy target, a quiet old man riding the bus. What they didn't know was that he was a battle-tested Vietnam War veteran, and the lessons they'd learn would stay with them forever. It was just another evening commute on the 5:15 bus heading into downtown Baltimore. The air inside was stale, packed with tired commuters eager to get home. Conversations hummed softly, occasionally interrupted by the squealing of brakes near the front. An elderly black man boarded and settled into a seat. His hands, worn and calloused, rested on a cane that looked as if it had lived just as many years as he had. His attire was simple, an old jacket and pressed trousers, suggesting a man who valued dignity over extravagance. At first, no one took much notice of him. He blended into the background, the kind of figure you'd notice only fleetingly before forgetting. But his posture told a different story. He sat upright, his eyes calm, as if no burden could break his spirit. Yet a subtle furrow in his brow hinted at a life lived through countless struggles. A few seats back, a group of teenagers hopped on the bus. Their laughter was sharp, and they moved with the careless confidence of youth, looking for their next target. One of them, a tall boy in a red hoodie, spotted the old man and his eyes gleamed, not with respect, but with mischief. He whispered something to his friends, setting off a chorus of laughter. The man didn't flinch, his eyes trained on the passing city streets. If he heard the murmurs, he gave no sign. But the teenagers weren't content with just whispers. "Hey, old man," shouted the boy in red, his voice slicing through the bus's hum. "Did you lose your walker? Bet you're waiting for someone to carry you home." A ripple of tension spread through the bus. Some passengers glanced toward the teens, others toward the man, but most kept their heads down, pretending not to notice. The old man shifted slightly in his seat, but said nothing, his gaze still focused on the world outside. Emboldened by the lack of response, the boy in the red hoodie stood up, swaying slightly as the bus bounced over a pothole. "What's wrong, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue?" The man's fingers tightened slightly around his cane, but his face remained unreadable. In his eyes, there was a flicker, not of anger, but of something stronger, patience. He slowly turned his head, just enough to meet the boy's gaze. In that moment, something shifted. There was no sign of fear, no trace of fury, just an unwavering strength that seemed to settle the tension in the air. The boy paused for a split second, but his pride pushed him to continue. The bus continued on its route, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. No one could have known that the old man's silence wasn't weakness. It was a deliberate choice, one that would soon change everything. The teenagers' laughter grew louder, demanding attention. The boy in the red hoodie leaned in, mocking, "What's the matter, old man? Too good to talk to us." His friends snickered at the joke. One of them, a stocky boy wearing a backward cap, chimed in, "Probably can't even hear us. You need a hearing aid, too?" The old man remained still, his cane firmly resting between his knees, his face betraying no emotion. There was no hint that their words had reached him. His hands tightened slightly around the worn wood of his cane. For a moment, he glanced at the floor, grounding himself in the present. Across the aisle, a young woman shifted uncomfortably in her seat, casting a wary glance at the teenagers before returning to her phone. A man in a gray suit adjusted his tie and buried himself deeper into his newspaper, visibly uneasy. No one wanted to intervene. The boy in the red hoodie looked at the man, smirking. He turned to his friends and smirked. "Dude, he probably thinks he's too good for us. What, you some kind of king or something?" "Yeah," another boy added. "You gonna knight us with that cane, Grandpa?" Their taunts were sharp, full of the reckless energy of youth. They laughed louder, fueled by the man's silence and the passengers' reluctance to intervene. The old man shifted slightly, tilting his head as if recalling a distant memory. "Say something," the boy in the red hoodie demanded, his voice now tinged with irritation. "Or are you scared?" The bus jerked to a stop at a red light, momentarily silencing the chatter. Finally, the man spoke, his voice calm yet firm. "Respect is a lesson some people only learn the hard way." His words hung in the air, heavy and unmistakable. The teenagers exchanged glances, unsure of how to react, but Red Hoodie quickly recovered, masking his unease with sarcasm. "Oh, so he talks now," he sneered. "Respect? That's rich, coming from someone too scared to stand up for himself." The old man slowly turned his head to meet the boy's gaze. "You think strength is loud, don't you? You have no idea what strength looks like." The bus fell into an uneasy silence. Every passenger was now paying attention. Even the boys' friends were unsure, their laughter fading into nervous smiles. The bus lurched forward when the light turned green, its passengers swaying with emotion. Red Hoodie stepped closer to the man, leaning over him with mock intimidation. "Why don't you show us then? Let's see how strong you are." The old man exhaled deeply, bracing himself. His eyes flickered calmly toward the boy, unreadable yet unshakable. It wasn't just the boy who was about to be taught a lesson. Everyone on the bus was about to witness something unforgettable. For a moment, the bus seemed to shrink, the tension palpable. The old man stood still, his cane firmly grasped between his hands, his gaze unblinking. In the stillness that followed, his thoughts wandered back to another time, 40 years ago, far from Baltimore. He had been knee-deep in the humid swamps of Vietnam, the roar of helicopters and gunfire filling the air. Every muscle had been taut, every nerve on edge. Survival had been instinct, not a choice. Back then, he was younger than these kids taunting him, but the war had aged him quickly. He remembered the faces of his brothers in arms. Some were gone, their memories living on in fragments, like their shared laughter on quiet nights or the stories of home. The weight of their loss lingered long after the war had ended, etched into his being. The bus jolted over a pothole, snapping him back to reality. He straightened, gripping his cane tighter. He wasn't angry. Anger had long been gone. What he felt now was something deeper, a responsibility to teach these boys a lesson they hadn't learned yet. Red Hoodie interrupted his thoughts with a sharp, mocking laugh. "What's the matter, Grandpa? Cat got your tongue again?" The man didn't respond. Instead, his eyes took in everything. The boy's posture, the bravado, the false confidence of someone who had yet to understand real challenges. He had seen this before in young soldiers, those who thought they were invincible, until the battlefield taught them otherwise. Across the aisle, an older woman whispered to the man beside her, her eyes darting nervously at the scene. No one spoke up. No one intervened. The silence wasn't exactly fear, it was more like an unspoken agreement to stay uninvolved. The man finally spoke, his voice steady. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said, his words stopping the boy mid-laugh. "Oh yeah?" Red Hoodie sneered, trying to sound unfazed. "Who, your old war buddies?" The man leaned back slightly, his gaze unwavering. "No, a young soldier who thought he was untouchable. He learned otherwise." Red Hoodie snorted, but his friends were quieter now. Their smirks faltered. "Whatever, man," one of them muttered. "You're just an old has-been. Nobody cares about your stories." The man's lips curled into the faintest smile, not amused, but knowing. "Careful, son," he said. "Sometimes stories are all that keep you from making the same mistakes." The words lingered in the air, and for a brief moment, even the bus seemed to soften. But Red Hoodie wasn't ready to back down. He took a step closer, inches from the old man. "You think you're so wise, huh? Why don't you prove it?" The old man's eyes narrowed, not with anger, but in preparation. He adjusted his cane slowly, deliberately, like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. The storm building inside him wasn't born of rage, but of experience. And soon, these boys would learn the true meaning of strength. The bus rumbled on, its passengers frozen, the tension so thick it filled the air. The elderly man stood slowly, his cane steadying him as he rose. He wasn't large. Age had thinned his frame. But the way he carried himself made him seem taller, stronger. The boys watched, their smirks fading as curiosity replaced their arrogance. "You want me to prove something?" the man asked, his voice calm, almost too quiet, yet commanding. His eyes locked onto Red Hoodie. "Let's talk about proof." Red Hoodie chuckled nervously, stepping back. What, you gonna hit me with that cane, old man? The man's hand brushed the top of the cane, but he didn't raise it. No, he replied simply. But I will teach you something your mouth clearly hasn't learned. Restraint. The air crackled with tension. The other passengers watched intently, some leaning forward to catch every word. Do you think this is strength? The man continued, gesturing at the boys' posturing and loud taunts. It's not strength. It's fear. Fear that the world will see you for what you really are. The boys' friends shifted uneasily, their confidence visibly wavering. One of them muttered, "Come on, man. Let's just sit down." But Red Hoodie wasn't finished. His pride was on the line, and he wasn't about to back down. "You don't know anything about me, old man," he retorted, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I know more than you think," the man replied, his voice still calm and steady. "You see this cane? It's not just a stick. It's a reminder. Every scar, every ache in these old bones comes with a story. Stories of battles fought not with fists, but with courage, discipline, and honor. Things you wouldn't understand, because you've never had to earn them." The boy's bravado wavered. His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't make a move. The old man leaned in slightly, his gaze sharp and piercing. "Do you know what it's like to watch your friends die so you can live? To carry their memory with you every single day, knowing you owe them more than you can ever repay?" The words hit harder than any punch could. The boy blinked, his jaw working as if he wanted to say something, but no words came. The bus was silent except for the rhythmic hum of its engine. "You're lucky, kid," the man continued, his tone softening just slightly. "You don't have to learn these lessons the hard way. But keep going like this, disrespecting people, thinking the world owes you something, and you'll find out soon enough. And when that day comes, you'll wish you'd listened." The boy's face turned red, not from anger, but from shame. He looked away, his shoulders slumping. His friends avoided the old man's gaze. The laughter that had filled the air earlier now seemed like a distant memory. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed, but his hands remained steady on the wheel. No one else moved. The silence felt deafening, broken only by the soft glide of the bus down the road. The old man straightened, his posture unyielding. "Now," he said firmly, "take your seat, or get off this bus." Red Hoodie hesitated for a moment, then muttered something under his breath before retreating to his seat. His friends followed suit, heads lowered, their bravado shattered. The confrontation was over, but the lesson had only just begun. As the teenagers sank into their seats, the tension began to lift, though the silence remained. Passengers exchanged quiet glances, some approving, others in disbelief. The elderly man remained standing for a moment, his grip on the cane firm but relaxed. He scanned the bus, making eye contact briefly with each passenger before he slowly returned to his seat. A middle-aged woman sitting near the front finally broke the silence. "Sir," she said, her voice hesitant but respectful. That was brave. Her words carried a mix of admiration and guilt, as if she regretted not speaking up sooner. The man turned his head slightly and gave her a small nod. "It wasn't bravery," he replied. "Just doing what needed to be done." Behind him, Red Hoodie and his friends sat unusually quiet. The boy stared out the window, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His friends whispered among themselves, their voices low and subdued. It was clear they had been shaken, not just by the man's words, but by the realization that their actions had consequences beyond a quick laugh. The bus continued its journey, the engine humming softly. A young man near the back, wearing headphones around his neck, spoke up. "Vietnam, right?" he asked, his tone tentative but curious. The old man turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he answered simply. "My grandfather served there," the young man continued. He never talked about it much, but when he did, his voice trailed off, and he glanced down at his hands. "Thank you for what you did, for what you gave." The old man's lips curved into a faint smile. "We all gave something," he said. "Some of us more than others." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Several passengers nodded quietly, the weight of his statement sinking in. The atmosphere on the bus had shifted. Where there had once been tension, now there was reflection, a shared understanding of the gravity of the moment they had just witnessed. One of the boys from the group, the stocky one with the backward cap, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. We shouldn't have said those things." The man turned to look at him, his expression softening slightly. "Apology accepted," he said. "But remember, respect isn't something you give just because someone demands it. It's something you give because it's the right thing to do." The boy nodded quickly, his face flushed. Red Hoodie didn't say anything, but shifted uncomfortably, clearly wrestling with his thoughts. The bus slowed as it approached the next stop. The old man glanced out the window, his eyes briefly scanning the familiar street corner. He tapped his cane once on the floor, then rose to his feet. Before he exited, he turned to face the bus, his voice carrying over the hum of the engine. "Kindness and respect cost you nothing," he said, addressing no one in particular, yet speaking to everyone. "But withholding them can cost you everything." The door hissed open, and the man stepped off. His gait was steady, and his presence lingered long after he was gone. The bus remained silent as it pulled away from the curb, passengers lost in their thoughts. They had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had witnessed a lesson in dignity. For some, that lesson would stay with them long after the bus ride ended. As the bus rolled on, the atmosphere remained heavy with contemplation. Conversations that had once filled the space with idle chatter were now whispers or silence altogether. For many on that ride, the old man's words echoed louder than any noise they'd heard all day. Red Hoodie sat slumped in his seat, his once bold posture deflated. His friends avoided eye contact with each other, their faces a mix of guilt and embarrassment. Across the aisle, the young woman who had earlier stayed silent now stared out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She had been a bystander like so many others, but now she questioned why she hadn't done more. The middle-aged woman near the front took out her phone, but didn't use it. Her fingers brushed over the screen absent-mindedly, lost in thought. The young man in the back, who had spoken about his grandfather, leaned his head back, eyes closed, his mind lost in reflection. It wasn't just a moment for the teenagers. It was a wake-up call for everyone. The lesson wasn't just about respect for elders. It was about recognizing the weight of someone's journey, the battles they fought, and the strength it takes to walk through life with quiet dignity. As the bus reached its final stop, passengers began filing out, each carrying the moment with them in their own way. The group of teenagers exited together but walked apart. Their usual boisterous energy was replaced by subdued introspection. Red Hoodie paused at the corner, glancing back at the bus before shoving his hands into his pockets and walking away. For the passengers who remained, the silence spoke volumes. They had witnessed a simple truth delivered with unwavering resolve. Respect isn't earned through fear or intimidation, but through understanding and compassion. To those watching the story, ask yourself, what battles have the people around you fought? How can a single moment of kindness or respect change someone's day, or even their life? Remember, every person you meet carries a story you might never know. Treat them with the dignity they deserve. And if you found this story meaningful, don't forget to share it, leave a comment, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the values that truly matter. Together, we can spread these lessons and create a kinder, more compassionate world.